We're diving into some pretty interesting stuff today. Uzbekistan's energy situation, right? It seems like they're at this crossroads, trying to figure out how to keep the lights on, so to speak, but also deal with this global push to lower emissions. Not exactly a simple problem to solve.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, historically, Uzbekistan was a big player in natural gas production, right? But the data is pretty clear. There's been a decline. And that obviously leads to these big questions about where their energy is going to come from. Are they going to become more reliant on imports? And then you layer on top of that all these environmental concerns, especially when you're talking oil and gas.
Okay, so let's break this down a bit because there's this major company in Uzbekistan, Sanoat Energetika Guruhi, Saneg for short. They used to be known as Jizzakh Petroleum, and they're now the biggest independent oil and gas producer in the entire country.
Yeah.
And from what you've been saying, it seems like they're not just sitting back and watching this all happen. They're actually trying to, make a difference here.
Exactly. They're not a small player either.
Yeah.
Think about it. They're responsible for something like 80% of Uzbekistan's oil production. That's massive. And their operations, they're spread out across the country. They've got over 5,000 employees, facilities in places like Karshi, Mubarak, Fergana, Andishan. And what's really interesting, at least to me, is how they're approaching this issue of flared gas. It's something that comes up a lot in oil and gas extraction, and it's a big deal.
Flared gas. Okay, for those who might not know, remind us, what exactly is that? That's the gas that gets released when they're drilling for oil, right? And instead of, capturing it or using it, it just gets burned off. Seems so wasteful. Why is that such a big concern for a country like Uzbekistan, both in terms of energy, but also, the environmental impact?
You got it. Think of it this way. You're basically tossing away a valuable resource. This gas, mostly methane, could be a fuel source. And then on the environment side, which is a huge deal globally these days, flaring pumps a ton of CO2 right into the atmosphere. So it's a double whammy, right? A wasted opportunity for Uzbekistan and a hit to the environment.
So what we're really looking at today then is how Saneg is tackling this whole flared gas thing. They're taking this, this waste product and figuring out how to turn it into something they can actually use. We'll get into the specifics, but the goal is pretty clear. Boost Uzbekistan's energy supply, and this is the crucial part, lower their emissions. Sounds like a win-win if they can pull it off.
Definitely. It's a huge opportunity for them. And you found some really interesting info on how they're doing it. There's this $14 million project they kicked off in March last year. And it's not just them going it alone. They've actually partnered up with some other companies.
Right. I remember seeing that. They teamed up with Vema, which is a Swiss company. Then there's ICA-Finance from Norway, and GRDC, which is Uzbekistan's own geo-research and development company. What a mix. So what exactly came out of this whole collaboration?
Well, they actually built stuff, like real infrastructure on the ground. They've got 70 kilometers of brand new gas pipelines. Plus, they installed 21 of these modular compressor units across 7 of their main oil fields, names like Northern Urtabulak, Sardob, Shurtepa. You get the idea. And according to Saneg's CEO, Tulkin Yusupov, this whole system, it can handle something like 70 million cubic meters of methane per year.
Whoa, 70 million cubic meters. That is a ton of gas that was just going up in smoke before. So what's the impact of actually capturing and using all that methane?
Well, the first thing you notice is they put out the fires, literally. 6 flares gone, just like that. That's a big visual reminder of less emissions. And when you put it in numbers, they've knocked down their CO2 emissions by almost 140,000 tons every year.
Pretty significant, right? Even the director of Vema, Mikhail Partakovich, was saying this puts Uzbekistan in a much better position globally. Shows they're serious about finding better energy solutions. It's great to see those numbers. Now, let's get a little more technical for a minute. How does this whole thing actually work? We're talking about capturing the gas and then feeding it into the national gas grid, right?
Yeah, basically. And these compressors, they're the key. They operate at pressures between 5 and 40 atmospheres. Think of it like pumping up a bike tire, except way more powerful. The gas coming out of the well isn't at a high enough pressure to travel through the pipeline system. These compressors, they give it that extra push so it can flow through the pipelines and actually be used. Oh, and they got all these fancy ultrasonic gas flow meters, make sure everything's measured really precisely.
So there's some serious tech involved here, and the partnerships, those were clearly super important. How did each of those companies contribute to this whole project?
Vema and ICA-Finance, they really spearheaded the whole thing. Came up with the idea, brought the money, did all the initial studies to make sure it would actually work, and then they oversaw the entire project to make sure everything went smoothly. GRDC, being from Uzbekistan, they knew the local stuff really well. So they handled all the technical documents, making sure everything was up to code, all that. And then Saneg, they know their own operations better than anyone, right? So they took care of the actual building, the pipelines, installing all the equipment.
A real team effort, huh? And it doesn't sound like they're stopping there. There was something about them planning a similar project at the Shurtan field.
Yeah, they're working with Vema again on that one. It's still in the early stages, but Vema's going in to figure out just how much gas is being flared there. Then they'll come up with a solution specifically for Shurtan, kind of like they did for the other 7 fields. Shows they're serious about expanding this whole flared gas utilization thing.
Now, beyond the flaring issue, it seems like Saneg is really trying to be, more environmentally friendly overall. I saw something about an LDR campaign. What exactly does LDR stand for and what's involved in that?
So LDR is leak detection and repair. It's all about finding and fixing those pesky little methane leaks that can happen across the oil and gas infrastructure. You might think, oh, a small leak here and there, no big deal, but across their entire operation, that adds up. And Saneg, they're not messing around. They teamed up with Vema and ICA-Finance again for this one.
And they're using some really high-tech stuff, right? Like drones and all sorts of fancy analytical systems. What kind of impact has this had on their emissions?
The results are pretty impressive, actually. The info you dug up says this LDR campaign, it's preventing something like 83,000 tons of CO2 equivalent methane from being released every year. To put that in perspective, that's like taking 20,000 cars off the road. Just shows you how much of a difference these leak repairs can make.
Wow, that's a huge difference. And it brings up something important, right? We always hear about CO2, but methane is a pretty powerful greenhouse gas on its own, even if it doesn't stick around in the atmosphere quite as long.
Absolutely. Methane doesn't last as long as CO2 up there, but it's way more potent in the short term. So cutting down on methane, it has a more immediate impact on slowing down climate change. That's why this whole LDIR program is such a big deal.
And it looks like people are taking notice.
Yeah.
I read that Saneg is the first company in Central Asia to register a methane emissions reduction program with Germany's Emissions Trading Authority. That's a pretty big deal, right?
Yeah, it's a sign they're doing things by the book, internationally recognized standards and all that. Following the CDM methodology, which comes from the European Fuel Quality Directive, it shows they're not just saying they're reducing emissions, they're proving it in a way that everyone can trust. This registration, it opens up some doors for them too, especially when it comes to carbon markets.
So it's not just about what they're doing today, it's about setting themselves up for the future, where carbon emissions really matter. It's interesting to look at how Saneg even got to this point, right? Back in 2019, they got the rights to over 100 oil fields that used to be state-owned. That's a pretty massive jump for them.
Yeah, that was a big moment for them. Getting access to those 103 fields, that really launched them into the top spot for oil production in Uzbekistan. And now, like we said, they're responsible for 80% of the country's oil. But they haven't just stopped there. They've got all these new techniques to boost oil flow from these old fields. Plus, they even bought an oil refinery. They're really a major force in Uzbekistan's energy world now.
And even though they're mostly focused on oil, their gas production has been increasing like crazy too, more than doubled in just a few years. And this is happening when the national gas production's going down. Pretty impressive, I gotta say.
Yeah, they hit almost 1.3 billion cubic meters of gas by 2023. Shows you how efficient they are. But they're not done yet. Their big goal, 3 billion cubic meters. And that includes tackling those tight reservoirs, which is a whole other challenge. It's clear they're going to be even more important to Uzbekistan's energy future.
Okay, so let's zoom out for a second and look at the big picture. We've seen how Saneg is really taking the initiative in Uzbekistan. They're tackling this declining gas production head on, and they're finding ways to do it without trashing the environment. They've partnered up with some really innovative companies, built all this new infrastructure to capture gas that was just being burned off before. Their LDR campaign is cleaning up methane leaks, which is a huge deal. And they're doing it all in a way that's getting them recognized internationally. All this while they're rapidly expanding their operations and becoming a major player in Uzbekistan's energy sector. It's a pretty amazing story.
Yeah.
When you think about it.
Absolutely. It really shows you that a company can be profitable and environmentally responsible at the same time. Saneg's definitely setting an example, not just for Uzbekistan, but for the whole world.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? If they can do it with flared gas and methane, what other industrial byproducts are out there just waiting to be turned into something useful? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive. It's been really enlightening.